How to Live in Abundance with the Secret from Psalm 23. Following in the footsteps of Napoleon Hill, you already know those words by heart. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You have said them at funerals, in hospital waiting rooms, in your car on the way to a job interview. Maybe you said them last night without even thinking about it. But here is what nobody has ever told you about those 8 words. Napoleon Hill, after spending 25 years interviewing the wealthiest and most successful men in American history, said that Psalm 23 was the single most complete psychological blueprint for building financial abundance he ever found. Not a motivational book, not a business strategy. The 23rd Psalm. In the next 20 minutes, you are going to read these verses the way a success strategist reads them, and you are going to understand exactly why, despite everything you have worked for, your bank account still does not reflect the level of person you know yourself to be. Stop and think about that for a second. That gap between who you are and what you have. There is a precise, documented reason for it. And it has nothing to do with how hard you work, how smart you are, or what opportunities you have had. It has everything to do with one specific setting inside your own mind that nobody ever taught you how to change. We are going to go through this psalm, verse by verse. Each one contains a practical instruction that Hill's wealthiest clients were using, most of them without ever realizing where it came from. Stay through verse 4. That is the one that changes the entire equation. The decree of mental sovereignty. The science of I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Most people hear this as a passive comfort, a hope that things will eventually get better. But read it again with fresh eyes. This is not a wish. This is a decree issued in the present tense. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying the psychology behind why some people accumulate wealth while others with equal intelligence and equal effort never do. His conclusion was precise. The difference is not strategy, and it is not luck. It is the internal declaration a person makes about their own relationship to abundance. When you say, I shall not want, you are not asking for something. You are telling your subconscious that the state of wanting, of lacking, of chasing, of never quite having enough, is simply not available to you. You are closing a door. Here is why that matters neurologically. Your brain cannot simultaneously hold 2 contradictory beliefs at full strength. When you spend your days telling yourself you need more money, more security, more recognition, you are loudly confirming to your nervous system that you are currently without these things. You reinforce the very condition you are trying to escape. Hill called this the principle of autosuggestion, the idea that your dominant mental state becomes your operating instruction. The man who walks through his day with a quiet, settled sense that he has what he needs, that he is building towards something real, that his best years are ahead of him. That man makes fundamentally different decisions than the man walking through the same day in a low-grade state of scarcity and anxiety. Think about the last time you made a major financial or career decision from a place of fear, not clarity. Fear. How did that turn out? Now think about the decisions you made from a place of genuine confidence, when you felt grounded and sure of your direction. The quality of those 2 categories of decisions is not even comparable. The decree of I shall not want is not about denying reality. It is about choosing which reality gets to run in the background of your mind while you work. And that choice, made deliberately every single morning, is the foundation everything else rests on. But a decree without stillness is just noise. The next verse reveals the biological reason why most men never hear the instructions their own mind is trying to give them, and what the psalm prescribes as the solution. The architecture of stillness. Why your best ideas require silence. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Here is a question worth sitting with honestly. When was the last time you had a truly great idea, the kind that shifted something in your career or your finances while you were stressed, reactive, or running on 4 hours of sleep? The answer is almost certainly never. And there is a precise biological reason for that. When your brain is flooded with cortisol, the hormone your body releases under chronic stress, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part responsible for strategic thinking, creative problem solving, and long-range planning, goes offline. your brain shifts all available resources to the survival centers. You become reactive, short-sighted, and risk-averse in ways that are not rational but are completely automatic. Napoleon Hill described this same phenomenon without the neuroscience vocabulary. He said the mind must reach a state of perfect calm before it can receive what he called the plans of infinite intelligence. Strip away the language and the instruction is identical. Your best strategic thinking requires a quiet mind. The man who is 45 years old, running a business, or managing a career, carrying a mortgage and family responsibilities, that man's default state is almost never quiet. It is loud, it is reactive. Every notification, every deadline, every piece of bad news is a stone thrown into the water, and murky water does not show you the bottom. Green pastures and still waters are not rewards for success. They are prerequisites for it. The deliberate practice of protecting even 30 minutes of genuine stillness each day, without a screen, without an agenda, without trying to solve anything, is not a luxury. It is maintenance on the most important piece of equipment you own. The man who learns to be still on purpose becomes capable of seeing opportunities that are invisible to the man who never stops running. He makes better decisions. He recovers faster from setbacks. He is simply operating on a different level than the people around him. But stillness alone is not enough if the ground beneath it is compromised. The verse that follows addresses something most men over 40 carry without ever naming it directly, and it is the hidden weight that keeps capable people from reaching the results their effort deserves. The protocol of restoration, clearing the hidden debt on your potential. He restoreth my soul. 3 words, and they may be the most practically important in the entire psalm for a man in his 40s or 50s who has been building, striving, and absorbing setbacks for 2 or 3 decades. Napoleon Hill called this process mental cleansing. He observed it consistently among the men he studied, those who never dealt with the accumulated psychological weight of past failures, resentments, and losses found that same weight becoming a silent ceiling on everything they tried to build afterward. Think of it this way. You are trying to run a high-performance engine that has 20 years of unresolved residue in the system. Old grudges you have never fully let go of. Failures you replay when you should be sleeping. The money you lost. The opportunity that passed. The partnership that collapsed. None of it is consciously blocking you, but all of it is costing you processing power every single day. Marcus Aurelius, who governed the most powerful empire on earth while managing constant external crises, wrote that the soul is dyed the color of its habitual thoughts. He was not being poetic. He was describing the precise mechanism by which a man's internal defaults shape his external results, whether he intends them to or not. Restoring your soul in practical terms means 2 things. First, it means forgiving yourself for the decisions you made with the information you had at the time. The man who lost money in the wrong investment at 38, or chose the wrong business partner at 42, made those choices with the tools he had. Carrying them as permanent evidence of your inadequacy is not honest. It is expensive. Second, it means completing the past so it stops leaking into the present, not forgetting it, completing it, understanding what it taught you, extracting the lesson with precision, and then releasing the emotional charge. The lesson stays. The weight goes. A restored soul is not a soft or sentimental concept. It is a man operating at full capacity, because nothing is running in the background that should not be there. It is the difference between a computer that boots cleanly and one that takes 10 minutes to start, because it is processing conflicts from 3 years ago. Once that restoration is in place, the path forward becomes visible in a way it could not be before. And that path has a specific quality to it. A quality the psalm describes in the next verse, with a precision that Hill spent years trying to explain to his students. The geometry of integrity. Why honesty is the fastest path to wealth. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is the verse most people skip over because it sounds moral rather than practical. That is exactly the mistake Hill warned against. Righteousness here is not an ethical lecture. It is a geometry lesson. Hill studied men who built and then lost fortunes. He studied others who built wealth that compounded over decades. The single most consistent differentiator he found was not intelligence, not timing, not even talent. It was the presence or absence of what he called definite purpose aligned with character. Here is the practical translation. When you operate with integrity, when your word matches your action, when your private behavior matches your public position, when you deal honestly, even in situations where dishonesty would be undetectable, you eliminate an enormous category of internal friction that most people do not even realize they are carrying. Every compromise of your own standards requires cognitive maintenance. You have to remember what you said to whom. You have to manage the anxiety of potential exposure. You have to live with the low-grade dissonance of knowing that the person you present to the world is not entirely the person you know yourself to be. All of that runs in the background. All of it costs you energy and clarity. The man who operates from complete integrity moves through the world with a kind of ease that looks like luck from the outside. He does not have to manage contradictions. His reputation is consistent. People trust him automatically, and in business, trust is the single most valuable currency there is. It cannot be manufactured quickly. It can only be built through consistent, documented alignment between what you say and what you do. This does not mean being passive or avoiding conflict. It means that your direction is always clear because it is always honest. You know exactly where you stand and why. That clarity of position makes every decision faster and more confident. But walking a straight path does not mean walking an easy one. The psalm acknowledges this directly in the verse that many people find hardest to hear, and it is the one that contains the most concentrated practical power for a man navigating real difficulty. The alchemy of adversity. Turning your hardest season into your greatest asset. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Notice what this verse does not say. It does not say you will avoid the valley. It says you will walk through it without being destroyed by fear. Napoleon Hill identified what he called the 6 ghosts of fear. The fear of poverty, criticism, illness, loss of love, old age, and death. He found that virtually every person who failed to reach their potential was being controlled, consciously or unconsciously, by at least one of these fears. Not the actual circumstances, the fear of the circumstances. For a man between 35 and 60, the valley is not abstract. It might be the business that failed, the career setback that came at the worst possible time, the health scare that reordered everything, the financial loss that took years to recover from. These are real. They are not metaphors. But here is what Hill's research consistently showed. The men who ultimately built the most durable success were almost never the men who had the smoothest paths. They were the men who went through serious valleys and came out the other side with something that comfortable men never developed, a specific, tested knowledge of their own resilience, a certainty, born from experience, that they could survive difficulty and keep moving. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire while facing military invasions, plague, betrayal by trusted allies, and the death of children. He wrote in his private journal, not for public consumption, that what injures the hive injures the bee. He was reminding himself that his suffering was not separate from the world's suffering, and therefore not a sign of personal failure. It was the terrain that leadership required. The practical instruction here is this: stop treating your hardest periods as evidence that something is wrong with you or with your path. Start asking what capability the difficulty is developing that the comfortable path would never have produced. The valley is not the end of the journey. For most successful men, it turns out to have been the part that made them ready for what came next. And what comes next in the psalm is a shift in setting that contains one of the most psychologically sophisticated strategies for handling competition that Hill ever identified. The discipline of direction. How self-correction becomes your competitive edge. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Strip away every religious connotation and look at the tools described. A rod for correction and a staff for direction. These are not comfort items in the soft sense of the word. They are precision instruments for keeping a specific course under pressure. Napoleon Hill was emphatic on this point. The only domain a human being fully controls is the content of their own mind and the direction of their own attention. Everything else, the market, other people's behavior, external circumstances, falls outside the circle of direct control. The man who spends his energy trying to manage what is outside that circle exhausts himself without results. The man who spends his energy mastering what is inside it becomes increasingly powerful over time. The rod is your capacity for honest self-assessment, the willingness to look at your results without excuse or inflation and ask, is what I am doing actually working? Most people avoid this question because the honest answer is sometimes uncomfortable. But the discomfort of honest self-assessment is far less expensive than the cost of continuing in the wrong direction for months or years. The staff is your set of core principles, the values and commitments that you fall back on when the environment becomes unstable. For a man in business or career, at 40 or 50, the world is going to become unstable regularly. Markets shift, industries change, relationships end. The man with no internal staff has no stable ground to stand on when the external ground moves. The man with clear, deeply held principles has something to return to, a place where he knows exactly who he is and what he stands for, regardless of what is happening around him. Self-discipline at this level is not about grinding or suffering. It is about knowing precisely where you are going and having the internal tools to keep returning to that direction when life pulls you off course, which it will, regularly. The question is only how quickly you notice and how efficiently you correct. That capacity for disciplined confidence, the ability to remain grounded and purposeful while others around you are unsettled, is exactly what prepares you for the scenario the next verse describes. And it is a scenario every serious man will eventually face, the banquet of confidence. How to thrive when others want you to fail. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. This is the verse Napoleon Hill cited more than any other from the psalm in his private correspondence with students. And his reason was simple. It describes, with complete accuracy, the psychological position that every person who builds significant success must eventually occupy. Your competition is real. The people who would prefer you fail, colleagues, rivals, sometimes people you thought were allies, are real. The envy, the criticism, the skepticism from people who doubt your capacity or resent your ambition is real. The psalm does not pretend otherwise. It acknowledges the presence of opposition directly. What it describes, though, is a man who is eating well in the presence of all of it. Hill's observation was this: the men who crumbled under competition and criticism shared one vulnerability. Their confidence was dependent on external validation. When people approved of them, they moved forward. When people doubted them or actively worked against them, they stalled. Their internal state was hostage to the external environment. The men who thrived under pressure had built what Hill called crystallized self-confidence, a settled, evidence-based belief in their own capacity that did not require the agreement of anyone watching. They were not indifferent to results. They were indifferent to the opinions of people who were not qualified to evaluate them. Think about the areas of your career or business where you have genuine, documented competence. 20 or 30 years of experience in a field creates a knowledge base that most people critiquing you simply do not have. You know things about your industry, your craft, your clients, and your market that your critics cannot see. Sitting at that table and eating well is not arrogance. It is appropriate confidence in verified capability. The practical application is straightforward. Stop letting the presence of opposition determine the quality of your focus. Your job is not to silence the critics. Your job is to keep building. The results, compounded over time, are the only argument that ultimately matters. Your success, however, is not designed to stop with you. The next verse reveals why genuine overflow, not retention, not hoarding, is the actual mechanism through which lasting abundance sustains itself. The law of overflow. Why generosity is the most rational financial strategy. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Napoleon Hill called this the law of going the extra mile. In 40 years of studying successful people, he never found a single exception to it. The men and women who built durable, compounding wealth were always delivering more value than they were being paid for in the short term. This is not a moral prescription. It is a market observation. When you consistently deliver more than is expected, more quality, more care, more attention to the outcome than the client or employer anticipated, you create something that money cannot directly buy: genuine loyalty and word of mouth. You become the person people call first, recommend without hesitation, and go out of their way to work with again. In a world where most people do the minimum required to avoid consequences, the person who routinely over-delivers becomes extraordinary by comparison, without even trying to be. The anointing oil in this verse represents distinction, the visible mark of someone whose work stands apart. In the modern context, it is the reputation that precedes you into rooms you have not yet entered. It is the client who says to a colleague, "You need to talk to this person, not because you asked them to, but because you earned it." The cup running over is the natural consequence of this approach at scale. When your standard is consistent overflow rather than minimum delivery, the returns eventually exceed what you can personally consume. Opportunities, resources, and connections begin arriving faster than you can deploy them. This is not mystical. It is the mathematical result of sustained superior value delivery in any market. The critical reframe for the man who is currently protecting every resource out of fear of scarcity: hoarding does not create abundance. Circulation does. The man who holds everything tightly sends a signal to his clients, his network, and his own nervous system that there is not enough. The man who gives generously from a position of internal confidence sends the opposite signal, and the market responds to both with consistency. All of this, the decree, the stillness, the restoration, the integrity, the courage in the valley, the discipline, the confidence under pressure, the overflow leads to a final state that the psalm describes not as a destination to arrive at, but as a permanent address, the permanent residence. Making abundance your default setting, not your destination. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Read the first word, surely, not hopefully, not eventually. Surely. Hill's final and most fundamental insight, the one that tied everything else together, was this: abundance is not primarily a financial state, it is a mental address. And the man who establishes his permanent residence there stops treating prosperity as something to be chased and starts experiencing it as a natural condition of his daily existence. Most people visit states of confidence, clarity, and financial ease occasionally. Something goes right, a deal closes, a check arrives, a project succeeds. They feel, briefly, like the person they want to be. And then the moment passes and they return to their default setting, which is some version of anxiety and uncertainty. Hill's wealthy subjects did not experience prosperity as a visitor. They lived there. Their baseline, the state they returned to naturally after any disruption, was settled confidence in their direction, their capacity, and their ability to generate results. Setbacks happened. Losses occurred. But these men had a different center of gravity. They recovered faster and moved forward more deliberately because they were always returning to the same internal address. The house described in the final verse is not a physical location. It is a permanent relationship with your own potential. The daily practice of governing your thoughts with the same intent that a serious professional governs their schedule, their finances, and their commitments. For the man at 45 or 55 who has been building for decades, this is not a new beginning. It is a clarification. The capacity for this kind of settled abundance has always been available to you. The only thing required is the deliberate decision to stop treating it as a future reward and start treating it as the present standard. Goodness and mercy following you all the days of your life is not a passive hope. It is the inevitable result of a man who has made the internal adjustments described in each verse of this psalm, and who maintains them with the same discipline he brings to everything else that matters. You are not working toward this, you are already capable of it. What remains is simply the decision to live as if you know that. Closing. Your next step, the 23rd Psalm, is not a comfort for the dying. It never was. It is a precise, practical, sequenced framework for the living man who is serious about building something real, financially, professionally, and personally, and who is willing to do the internal work that external results require. Napoleon Hill spent 25 years finding this in the interviews he conducted. You now have it in 20 minutes. The question is not whether this works. The man Hill documented proved that it does. The question is whether you will apply it with the same consistency and discipline you bring to the other serious areas of your life. You have built too much and come too far to let a correctable internal setting keep the cap on what is available to you. The house is ready. You know the address. The only remaining task is to move in permanently and stop visiting.